Welcome back to another episode of Tidal Flooding Talk. I'm meteorologist Joe Martucci. Meteorologist Dan Skeldon is here with us today. We are at the end of July, and when we get to this point in time, this is when hurricane season becomes real. 90% of hurricane activity happens after July 31st or in August going into November here. So we have a really relevant episode about the rest of the hurricane season, the majority of the hurricane season to come with Daniel Brown from the National Hurricane Center. My question for you, Dan, is does anyone call you Daniel?
My mom.
Your mom.
My
Okay.
mom insists to this day that I'm called Daniel. And growing up in my household before cell phones, if I had a friend call and they asked for Dan, she said, no, he's not here. And they hung up the phone and they had to call back and ask for Daniel. So,
Wow. Your mom was a tough cookie on that one.
yeah. And then Danny was absolutely forbidden. But everyone else, Dan the weatherman.
Dan.
So the short name, Dan, just kind of stuck.
That's true. I mean, as somebody with a full name that I don't really enjoy people calling me, all the time.
Joseph.
I
Yeah.
yeah, it's not that I hate it. It's just I don't know. It just feels like so proper. I feel like
Yeah.
more people go by Daniel than the people that go by Joseph. Does that make sense?
I would agree. I would
Yeah.
agree with
So
that.
anyway, well, we'll continue the Dan conversation in just a second here because we are going to bring on Daniel Brown, who is the operations division chief for the National Hurricane Center, which is part of NOAA down in South Florida. Daniel, thank you for coming on the show. And are you kind of an interchangeable Dan Daniel kind of thing? How does it work?
Yeah, that's correct. My mom always and family always called me Daniel. Got here at NHC, it didn't bother me much. People calling me Dan, and I think that's kind of what stuck in my professional career. But either way is fine with me.
Well, I'm glad we have such illustrious Dan and Daniels on the show for today. I'm just an average Joe here myself. So let's talk. We're here in July. Generally, in broad strokes, what's going on at the National Hurricane Center this time of the year?
Yeah, it's I mean, every day we're essentially looking at the models, the satellite imagery, and trying to figure out what may or may not form over the next week or so in the tropics. We're also looking at where we might have to task reconnaissance aircraft if we do have things in the outlook, and things are starting to get a little bit busier for us right now. Introduced a few areas in our tropical weather outlook, and also been monitoring quite a few systems across parts of the Pacific. So, kind of on cue. Here we are, kind of in mid-July. Things are starting to get a little bit busier as we get toward that August, September, October time period.
It is amazing, Daniel, isn't it? Because, I get, everyone on the East Coast watches hurricanes, and, in June and July start out slow, and they usually do, minus a couple of early season storms. People think, okay, well, we're in the clear, the hurricane season, whether an active season or a slow season is forecast, it's a bust. They don't know what they're talking about. And then August 1st comes around, and, everything just comes to life. This is supposed to be a below average season, but as we enter into August, even in a quiet season, that's when things heat up, right?
Yeah, it really is that August, September, October time period. Again, we do get some activity in some of the real busy years. You look a couple years ago, we had Beryl that was in early July. But again, this is more typical to have very little activity in that June, July time period with things really starting to ramp up. Sometimes even waits till like that third week of August or so before it really starts to ramp up. So, I always say it's a good time of year, this time of year, to replenish your hurricane supplies, rethink about your plans. Do that as we get into August, because that's when it typically does get busy.
And Daniel, and like Dan said, I'm gonna have to get this straight. As Dan said, we are expecting a below average hurricane season. Your forecast from NOAA, correct me if I'm wrong, was it 8 to 14 named storms this year with 3 to 6 hurricanes? Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, and again, we don't like to focus too much on the numbers. I mean, as you all know, that the big message is it really only takes that one storm. I mean, we have had years that were below normal. 1992 is really the poster child for that,
Yep.
especially down here in South Florida where I live. Andrew was the first named storm that year. Very devastating here in Miami-Dade County. made landfall as a Category 5. So again, it's always about being prepared. It really is. Can't focus too much on the numbers because it just does take that one to hit your area.
Daniel, do you have any, so I absolutely agree. I think you shouldn't focus on the below average number and, hopefully whatever storms form do stay out to sea, but, we always have to be prepared for that one that does break through. Are we looking at a specific part of the Atlantic Basin this year where, via water temperature profiles, the ongoing El Nino that continues to strengthen, like is it a year that we would be more inclined to look out towards the Cape Bird and the long track storms, something closer to home in terms of development, or could it be a mix and we're not really targeting one geographic area?
I mean, I kind of hate to target one geographic area, but I do know that in some of the previous El Nino years, again, you typically get that reduced activity across the tropical Atlantic. It does mean that you can get more systems that do form closer to home. We can get systems that form in the Gulf, off the South U.S. coast. So we've seen some of that in some of these below normal years. So it's something to watch out for. We had Arthur already that formed right along the Texas coast. I think that's kind of typical in some of these El Nino and below normal seasons is to have some of that type activity.
And that kind of increases the challenge, right? Because storms that come across Africa, and I apologize, my cell phone's going off in the background, the curb your enthusiasm tone, but that'll go right to voicemail. But in a long track storm, you obviously have more time to follow, spread the word, and kind of increase awareness. These home brews or storms that form closer to the coast can be more challenging, especially if they ramp up quickly in terms of getting the message out to people. Is that correct?
That's 100% correct. We do have to look out for these more short fused events that form. Strengthen, make landfall within just a couple of days. Thankfully, we now have the ability to issue these potential tropical cyclone advisories, put up watches and warnings for those type systems. But again, people are so used to having those longer lead times. With Beryl, it was more than a week of people being able to monitor that, especially there in along the coast of Texas. So it is always another reason why you want to have those supplies, the preparedness ready, because again, you get a shorter fused event, you're not going to have the amount of time as you do if you get something that forms, say, off the coast of Africa and tracks all the way across the Atlantic.
So let's get into the updates and the new products and services that the Hurricane Center is doing for this year. And every year, the Hurricane Center, you guys come up with come up with new products and services. So this year, if I'm correct, I see 5, at least I'm going to call them main ones. Inland tropical storm and hurricane alerts on the cone graphic are operational now with a mobile page as well. The National Hurricane Center has a mobile page. Storms with no chance of turning into a tropical system are separated out. The forecast track cone gets an upgrade with more accuracy, and a new experimental forecast cone is coming as well. And we'll dive into this one by one. But my question to you is, how does this process go about? When do you start talking about, hey, this is what we want to do? Is it for next season? Is it 2 seasons from now? Is it 3 years? What does that look like?
Yeah, it really depends on sort of the amount of overhead that is required to get to that end state. So we are talking already about potential product and service updates for 2027 and then really even 28 and beyond. For this year, there are substantial changes, but they're probably not as big as we've had in some previous seasons. But some of the products too go through an experimental phase, and that's really a phase that we are able to get feedback from customers, partners, the public, as to how well they were able to understand the product. Did the product meet their needs? And it gives us time to refine the product and then put it into operations. And the inland watches warnings on the cone went through that process. It was experimental for a year or two, and then we garnered some feedback, and that has now become operational this hurricane season.
Awesome. We're going to take our first break here, and we'll come back with much more on what to expect for the rest of hurricane season with services from the National Hurricane Center on Tidal Flood. Base flood elevation is the level floodwaters are expected to reach in a major storm. Building below it puts your home at risk. Building just 1 foot above it can significantly lower flood insurance costs and reduce flood damage. And don't forget to elevate mechanical equipment like air conditioners and generators. Small changes can make a big difference. This message is brought to you by the New Jersey Coastal Coalition.
Welcome back to this week's Tidal Flooding Talk. You have a trio of meteorologists focusing on what a lot of meteorologists focus on this time of year, and that is hurricanes. Back with Daniel Brown from the National Hurricane Center. Daniel, one of those improvements Joe mentioned, I want to go through them one by one here. You guys are always evolving the forecast cone. That's one of the biggest things that that viewers and people share on social media and look for on TV. Tell us about some of the most recent innovations and changes to that product.
Yeah, the cone's been around for a couple decades, and as you mentioned, it has evolved during that period. It started out really with our average forecast errors being the size of the cone. At one point, it was in transition to being kind of a 2/3 probability, such that about 2/3 of the time the track should stay within the cone, about a third of the time it goes out of the cone. But one of the real pitfalls of the cone, really through the whole entire existence of the product, is that it doesn't tell you anything about the impacts. It really tells you only about the track of the center. It doesn't tell you where the rain's going to fall, where you're going to get the strong winds, where the storm surge could be a problem. So a couple years ago, we decided to add on not only just the coastal watches and warnings, which you've seen for years on our cone, but also the areas inland that are under those same tropical storm and hurricane watches and warnings. We did that in experimental fashion again to get some feedback from users on that. And then this year that's going operational. So it now provides a better picture of what your wind risk is when you're looking at the cone. Because again, that wind risk can extend far beyond the cone, especially as that cone narrows when it's close to landfall.
Got it. So, with the, let's just talk about the current forecast cone. You had a reduction from up to about 7%. Depending on where you were. Now, it's important to note that this is where the forecast of the eye of the storm is going to be, not the impacts here. So, I think, and this is just a gut feeling, you can maybe verify that this improvement seems a little larger than usual. Is that true?
Yeah, you mean the cone has been getting smaller and smaller really over the past 20 years or so. A lot of those reductions were made really in that first decade. The last 8 or 10 years, we haven't seen quite as much reduction in the size of the cone. But again, as the cone has gotten smaller, it has meant more and more impacts are occurring outside the cone, and that's where we felt the need to highlight those watches and warnings on the cone. I always like to say that the cone was on a diet, but the storms really weren't. The storms are always the same size they've always been. It just means more impacts are occurring outside of the cone.
I like that. It's on a diet. And in the Pacific too, I saw anywhere from like a 3 up to 8% reduction in that size as well. Now, what's important to note too is that the cone is a 66% probability of the eye of the storm being within that cone. So 2 out of 3. This kind of segues me into I'm going to call it an experimental feature. I think that's the name for it, of a new forecast cone. I'm just going to say my opinion is I love this. I'm going to let you talk about it, but this brings the probability up to 90%, which is a huge jump. So can you tell us what that is and where people can find that? Is it possible for them to find that as well?
Sure. There is going to be a new experimental cone this year. It's going to be on the Hurricane Center website with each and every advisory. And it's basically, as you mentioned, it's now a 90% cone, meaning that it's really the likely path of the center of the storm, and how we constructed that. And it doesn't make the cone much wider. I think some people thought when we went from 67 to 90 that it was going to make the cone this really wide and expand it. But what we did was we really have looked at our errors, and we do this every year. We looked at our errors versus the timing errors, how fast or slow were the forecasts compared to the storm motion, and then how much left and right. And we actually have a little bit greater error typically with timing than we do with the left and right. So when we did the 90% cone, it did not make the cone much wider. It's just a little bit wider on each side It's really hardly even noticeable if you go compare them, but it does make the cone a little bit longer, again, because there's more of this timing uncertainty. And that's something that we really weren't able to convey much with the previous cone. So it actually not only, again, makes us now a likely path cone versus a probable, but it also then accounts for some of that timing uncertainty that we really didn't account for before.
So Daniel, Joe's a huge fan of this cone. It's in the experimental phase for a little while. Like, what would be the process be, or how long do these experimental phases, last? Where maybe 1 year, 2 years down the road from now, this will be the new core product, if you will.
Yeah, so our experimental products it's usually a year or two. I can tell you that we've gotten a lot of positive feedback already on this cone. So I feel like if we continue to see that, if the response is and feedback is as positive as it's been, I feel like it is something that we will probably want to make operational as quickly as we can, which could be as early as next hurricane season.
Wow, that'd be great. And just with the image that the Hurricane Center you guys provided, you're right. I mean, it's not much bigger. It's a little wider and a little more longer, but I mean, I would imagine this would be a typical 66% probability cone maybe 5 years ago or something like that. I'm just making it up. But just to hammer this one more time and then we'll move on. Talk to us about the improvement in the cone. Like, could you give us like something that we always talk about here being in New Jersey is Sandy in 2012, right? Like if Sandy was to happen today, like in the course of about 15 years, how much did that cone shrink?
I mean, it's shrunk quite a bit, but from about 2005 to 2015, it was cut probably by about 40%. Would be about my guess. It really did shrink quite a bit. Since that time, it has narrowed, but not nearly as much as it did in that previous decade. And that's, track forecasts continue to improve, but we've seen the rate of improvement start to slow a little bit. There is some theories that we can get to what's called limits of predictability, where you just aren't going to make much more progress. But one thing I will say, and throw this out too, is I think last year as we started to incorporate some of the AI models, we actually saw some improvements in our track forecasting ability by now having more of these models available. And so I do think there still could be some improvements that we see with track forecasting, which means that the cone is likely to continue to narrow for at least a few more seasons.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, better data and information is going to protect us all, right? So that's always good. Let's move on into something from your graphical tropical weather outlook. So this shows where storms could form here. And in the past, and you guys accounted for this here, there were storms that had 0% chance of forming, but they still showed up on the map in yellow, which was confusing if you weren't clicking and actually looking at it. So you guys made good with that. You guys are separating that out.
Yeah, so we added another category for those systems that we really don't expect to have any formation chance. Oftentimes, these may be systems that have had some development chance, but they're on their way down before they are taken out of the outlook. It can also be for a system that's producing some type of hazard over land, whether it's rainfall or some kind of gusty wind hazard, that we just want to highlight to say, hey, we see the feature, it doesn't have any development chance, and so we are now denoting those in a gray colored X on the outlook. Again, it's to help distinguish it from systems that do have some type of potential for formation beyond a few days.
And also, Danielle, on Joe's list of innovations and improvements for this year was a big improvement to the mobile site for the Hurricane Center, which is huge because when you think about it, and I work for a TV station, and just about every business has to improve their mobile services, and that's how most people get their information now. So tell us about some of the steps the Hurricane Center took.
Yeah, so we introduced a new website that's under hurricanes.gov/mobile. You can look at it today. It is a little bit more user-friendly. I think it's more modern than the current website. It has a new headlines using some of our products. It actually, one thing that's really nice about it is it resizes to the size of your device. The previous website, sometimes things may hang off and you had to scroll around, but the nice thing about the new mobile site, it does resize whether you're on a phone, a tablet, or you're even on a desktop. You can actually use it on a desktop, even though it's called the mobile site. And this also gave us the ability to test new things out on that site. And eventually, I think you'll see us transition our current website more into what that mobile site looks like. That'll take some time, but again, this gave us the opportunity to test things this hurricane season.
Oh, it looks great. I mean, I've been using it, this season. It definitely looks modern, right? And also like you're building your hurricane knowledge kit, like your vertical videos that you guys have done as well. I can't say I've seen you in one of those. Am I missing it? Did I not see you in one of them, or what's going on there?
We've got a lot of staff that have really taken that project on, expanding some of our social media to include, some videos that kind of explainers about some of the things that we talk about in our products, or about preparedness. We last year we did a video series for the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, talking about forecast ability from 2005 to today. So again, it's just some of our staff have really taken that and expanded upon that, trying to increase reach and also create, expand reach and new demographics, people to follow our website and follow along during hurricane season.
Awesome. We're going to take our final break, and we'll come back on the other side here on Tidal Flooding. Thanks to the New Jersey Coastal Coalition, your flood insurance bills are lower and your streets safer from the reality of flooding. Since beginning in 2013, we build more resilient shoreline communities. Our member towns develop and share in best practices that anticipate future concerns and create flooding solutions. From our town-specific free web app for flooding information to our weekly Tidal Flooding Talk show, we focus on flooding 24/7. Visit www.njcoastalcoalition.com for more. Flooding can happen outside mapped high-risk flood zones, and homeowners insurance typically does not cover flood damage. Know your property's flood risk, consider purchasing flood insurance, and never drive through a flooded roadway. People in your community can view local flood information and learn how to protect their properties at njcoastalcoalition.org. We have a dashboard there, along with an alerting service that member towns, including yours possibly, that you can participate in and know when tidal flooding will be near you. All right, continue our conversation with Daniel Brown at the NHC. We have one more. We just wanted to, we'll nail this one down, and then we'll keep going beyond this. And that's the inland tropical storm and hurricane alerts on the cone graphic are operational. So this is the most popular part probably of the NHC. It shows the forecast, the forecast cone, and it shows the current conditions of the storm and the forecast, but it also shows where hurricane warnings and hurricane watches are in effect. But now what we're saying is that counties that are inland will now see their county on the map, correct?
That's correct. We here at the Hurricane Center, we coordinate the placement of the inland watches and warnings with our local National Weather Service office. So it's kind of a collaborative process that we go through. And again, it's to really highlight areas, not just at the coast, but also inland areas where there's risk of tropical storm or hurricane force winds.
Great. Okay. So places like, in our case in New Jersey, we could be talking about Trenton, the state capital, could be in a tropical storm warning. You have in the graphic that the NHC put out in the press release, the state of Florida with Orlando in a hurricane warning. And then also if sometimes, you might be in a tropical storm warning and a hurricane watch. So that's accounted for as well. So just a really, good communication tool that we have.
Yeah, I think if you think back of some fast-moving, I know none of us were around for the 1935, or not 35, the 39 Long Island Express, I think it was. Maybe I got the year wrong.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. Yeah.
But
38.
what's that?
38. So.
Yeah, but that storm, it was so fast-moving that it not only brought winds at the coast, but it brought those winds across much of New England. And I think this is a way for us in a situation like that to be able to not just warn the coast, but also make sure we're warning other areas where there could be significant wind damage. Helene just a couple years ago was similar across the southeast U.S., where it brought those extreme winds all the way up across parts of eastern Georgia, upper state South Carolina, parts of western North Carolina. So again, a way to just highlight that wind threat not being just at the coast.
I want to shift gears for 1 second since I have the opportunity to ask you this question. I know, hurricane hunters, huge part of what you guys do to get data on forecasting, and I think there's at least talk of maybe replacing the planes. But new this year, the SUASs, the small uncrewed aircraft systems that are going to go into these storms and data? Like, are they drone-like? Like, what are these things? And is this something like that in the future could, or maybe even in the present, greatly improve hurricane forecasts? I mean, already more than what you guys have improved it.
Yeah, so this is some technology that's been tested for the last really couple hurricane seasons. They're releasing these small unmanned drones essentially from the aircraft. So they're just like the drop zones go out the bottom of the aircraft. These are doing that. The wings open up, and they're able to fly around for quite a while, and they can fly much lower than the aircraft can. So but that's been tested now last hurricane season. More testing will be done this hurricane season, and again, it increased our ability to be able to collect data, especially down in that boundary layer, the conditions really close to the ocean surface.
Awesome.
Very cool.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about you. You graduated from UNC Asheville in the '90s here with a degree in meteorology. Where are you from? Are you from the coast? Are you from further inland? And what got you interested in tropical weather?
Yeah, further inland. I was actually born in Central Florida, near Orlando, but we moved up into Western North Carolina near the Asheville Hendersonville area when I was basically in first grade. But having relatives in Florida, I was doing the hurricane tracking as a kid. And I always was fascinated by tropical weather, and probably at an early age, elementary school, wanted to pursue a degree in meteorology. And here I am today. I've been at the Hurricane Center for really almost my entire career. Did a small stint at the weather forecast office here in Miami, but same location. But really enjoy what I do. I feel like we really serve the public, putting out forecasts. It's so important to get the messaging and watches and warnings correct. And it's been a real rewarding career for myself.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, Daniel, so much. For coming on. You can go to hurricanes.gov for more information. You're on all the social medias, or at least most of them. Pretty much Facebook. You can go on X. You can go on Instagram. They're there and more. We're going to wrap up like we do every week with the one thing we can't stop talking about, tidal flooding or otherwise. We'll start with Dan Skeldon on this one. What's happening?
I'll just keep it hurricane related. And Daniel mentioned it. I'm born and raised in New England. Hurricane Gloria sparked my love of weather in '85. 6 years later, we had Bob. I'm just wondering, and Daniel, you mentioned the Long Island Express. I mean, I'm wondering when the New England hurricane drought ends. All my family's still up there. I mean, the 50s and 60s, you had Carol and Donna, and I mean, one after another, and it's been dead quiet for years up there. So, wondering if, ironically, in a very quiet year, perhaps, does the drought end? So I'm always keeping my family informed there.
Yeah. Daniel, I'll have you go next. What's on your mind? Tidal flooding or otherwise?
Well, sticking with the tropics, one thing that I always like to focus on too is make sure people stay safe after the storm. We lose a lot of lives from wind or storm surge, but it really is that recovery period that we see a lot of as many loss of life that occurs during that period. So we really want to make sure people are checking on each other, have that plan, check on your neighbors, especially the older population. Just make sure people are taking care of each other, especially when there's power outages. So help us this hurricane season. Please do that and stay safe.
Nice.
Yeah, sure. I guess I'll keep it on hurricane season 2. This season is, and Daniel, you said it at the top, but you only need one storm for it to be active near you. And I'm actually on my way after this talk, or after this podcast, to go do what's called the Down Beach Hurricane Seminar, which is Ventnor, Margate, and Longport. And my role is to talk about hurricane season. And that's what we're going to hammer home. I mean, New Jersey, thankfully, is not, it's not Florida, but we do see systems here. And it's always what's always so interesting to me is once we get from like mid-August to mid-October in New Jersey, a lot of our rain comes from tropical systems or remnant tropical systems more than likely. And when we don't get those, that can cause drought. And it definitely did in fall of 2024, which was our driest October on record since 1895, our driest climatological fall on record. So, I guess we do need, we kind of have a love-hate relationship with tropical systems. We need them. We just don't want them on top of us. So, not all tropical systems are bad for us. We need some of that moisture, but of course we don't want any of the devastation that comes with it as well. That's it. That's what we have for this week's episode. We appreciate you tuning in. Like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We're on YouTube as well. And we'll have new episodes for you the rest of the summer and until somebody tells us we're not doing Title Flooding Talk anymore. But we're still doing it. So we'll be back with you every Tuesday night. And we thank you for watching. Take care.